Hello and welcome to this presentation on perfectionism. Today we are going to explore what perfectionism is and the key areas of it. We're also going to discuss techniques that can be helpful and provide some resources for you to try, and links to these resources will be at the end of the presentation. What is perfectionism? It's the quality of liking to do things perfectly and not being satisfied with anything less. But who decides what is perfect? Because what I think is perfect and what you think is perfect are two different things. Sometimes it's about perspective, and this is something that we're going to look at as we go through the presentation. Let's start by reviewing the cycle of perfectionism, which is demonstrated in the image. If we start at the top with setting unrealistic goals, which we all do from time to time, but sometimes these can be impossible to reach and can leave us feeling kind of really low and anxious and have a loss of energy. So in order to kind of make ourselves feel a bit better about not achieving the goal, we set ourselves another goal, and then the cycle will continue again. So what we're going to do throughout this presentation is kind of look at the key areas of this cycle of perfectionism to hopefully give you a better understanding of the cycles that you may slip into yourself, and also give you a chance to reflect on your own experiences. So let's talk about unrealistic expectations and goals. I feel like this image represents life. Sometimes we all expect things to turn out like the straight line. However, in reality, it doesn't. And sometimes we need to learn to adapt to that. If you find that you're setting yourself kind of really high expectations, and it's going to require a lot of effort to get there, and sometimes it's just not realistic and we can't achieve that. We need to think about, what we can achieve, and without that costing too much to our well-being and the rest of our life. An example of kind of the implications of setting high standards is imagine you're about to take a test and your goal is to be top of the class. Once you've completed the test, you're waiting for the results, and when the results come in, you score a 98, which is an absolute amazing result. However, you soon realise that somebody else scored a 98.5, which is more than you, which means that you're not achieving that goal, and that this person then feels really let down by that because they haven't reached their goal, but actually they have accomplished something, but because their sole focus is on the expectation, the goal, they're not looking at actually the things that they have achieved. And it's about starting to look at things sometimes from a different perspective, because if the aim is not realistic, then it's really difficult to kind of manage the emotions that come up when we don't kind of achieve that. So it's important to kind of just take a moment and reflect on kind of the expectations and goals that you set yourself. Have you noticed that you may set yourself something unrealistic, or that you have really high expectations for yourself? And I'm not saying that it's not important to have goals and want to strive to achieve things. However, it's really about asking ourselves, can I achieve it? Is it realistic? And what's going to be the cost if I do focus on that? Within the cycle of perfectionism, with setting unrealistic expectations and goals, comes this fear of failing. This fear of failure kind of creates its own issues around this, such as procrastination or overworking. As humans, we've evolved to avoid things that make us feel bad. So we tend to avoid the things that make us, feel anxious or uncomfortable. So if we have a really high expectation of goal that's not going to be achieved, it might make us feel really anxious. So we're more likely to avoid it, making it more difficult for us to start a task. I don't know if any of you have ever noticed that you may do that when something feels really overwhelming, like I can't do it, that you've avoided it because of them feelings that come up. And the fear of failing can also create the opposite effect as well, where we'll have a sole focus. I must get this goal achieved at whatever cost. And from my experience of working with people, what I've seen is that people will neglect a lot of the other areas of their life, such as their well-being. People may skip meals, stay up all night, not see their friends. And it's important to realise the consequences of doing that. Have any of you noticed that you've kind of, you know, stayed up all night or skipped meals or kind of cancelled other commitments because you've just had to focus on studying? And just take that moment to reflect if you have done any of them things and actually what was the consequence. So stepping into these behaviours, can leave us with feelings of anxiety or low mood, with that fear of failing. That anxiety can also generate, lots of kind of negative thoughts, and some of them can be, what if I don't get it finished, or what if it's not good enough? And anxiety in itself, when it's at a higher level, can generate physical symptoms. What we also notice is that the low mood also generates kind of a lot of negative thought processes, and we notice kind of a real lack of energy with this. This is leading to tasks feeling like they're too much, and we just don't have the energy to kind of do them. And again, all of these things make it more difficult for us to start and focus on the tasks that we need to do. Have you noticed that you feel kind of quite anxious or low occasionally? And the whole situation and the steps that I've already covered, can lead you to become really critical about ourselves. We find that people start to tell themselves that they're not good enough because they haven't achieved the goal, or they should have done better. And these thoughts are really unhelpful and leave us feeling kind of really deflated and bad about ourselves. These thoughts diminish our motivation and over time will impact quite severely on our self-esteem. From my experience of working alongside people with perfectionism, we find that they put a lot of their self-worth into their goal of academic achievement, and when they don't achieve this, their self-worth is reduced. And that's not a great place to be at, because you are more than just one aspect of yourself. Have you noticed, that you've kind of said any of them kind of comments to yourself, I should have done better, or I'm not good enough? And if you have, take a moment to reflect and ask yourself, is it helpful for you to talk to yourself in that way? So another area which is not mentioned within the cycle, but I think it's something to be aware of, is kind of patterns of behaviour that we see. Do you prefer not to be seen? Do you often say, I'm fine, or everything's okay, even when it's not? And do you find that you find it difficult to ask for help if you're struggling with something? If you do any of these behaviours, you're not alone, because these are the most common behaviours that I see when I've worked alongside people who experience perfectionism. So, what do you make of the cycle? Can you relate to it? I hope it's helped you to identify kind of what happens within your own cycle, because once we have the ability to understand a problem, it allows us a chance to make a change. In order to do this, what I'm going to do now is introduce some techniques that I hope you may find helpful. So, what helps? SMART goals may be something that you've seen before, and if you haven't, that's okay too. The aim of SMART goals is to answer the questions that are listed there, to help you make things more achievable for you. You can see that the SMART is a mnemonic for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time limited. By using this and asking ourselves these questions, we can really make our expectations, goals, and beliefs around this a lot more realistic. So give it a go, see what happens. So, thought challenging is another area which can be helpful because we all use unhelpful thinking styles from time to time, such as, assuming we know what others are thinking or predicting what might happen in the future. And it's important to recognize what these unhelpful thinking styles are and, how they make you feel. There is a link to a worksheet which highlights all of the most common unhelpful thinking styles that we come across. And I'd suggest that you just have a little look at it and see if you notice that you do any of these thinking styles. Okay, and it's also to be mindful of when we're being critical about ourselves as well. And again, asking yourself that question, is it helping me to talk to myself like that? So worrying is something we all do from time to time. So tools and techniques such as the worry diary can be really helpful. The aim of the worry diary is to note down your worries during the day or night and tell yourself that you'll deal with it later once you've documented what it is. Okay. So you'll select the time of the day, which I like to call your worry time, to help you identify if the worries are problems and something you can do something about, or if they are hypothetical problems, so these situations that we think may happen. So when reflecting on the problems, it can be really helpful to gain a different perspective. What would somebody else think about that? So again, there is more links to resources on these techniques at the end of the presentation. A good way of starting to identify your thoughts is to try using thought diaries and journaling as well. So these techniques will allow you to record what you're thinking and feeling to help you notice if you're being critical or using unhelpful thinking styles. And they can give you a chance to reflect and on what you wrote down, and see if you would challenge it or maybe change it if you were to have that thought again. And if you did change it, how would that make you feel if you thought differently about that? It's all about reflection. So really just take the time to recognize your thoughts that come through, because sometimes we just allow them to come through without kind of vetting them, and our thoughts are not facts. So something else that helps is behavioural experiments. They allow us to explore and test our beliefs about ourselves, other people, and the world around us. What is really good about this is we need to kind of learn to approach our beliefs like a scientist and go through steps of challenging this belief. So the first step would be to identify what the belief is and test it. Rate the strength of the belief. How much do I believe this statement that I've just wrote? Rate it from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10. Then make a plan an experiment that would allow you to test the belief that you have. Identify any obstacles that could stop you from carrying out that. Is there anything going to get in the way? And then carry out the experiment, try it. This is the point where you'd require a bit of courage because, it's difficult to do and challenge your beliefs and carry out an experiment that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. Record the results to what scientists do and then reflect on it and see, how strongly do you still believe that belief? Has it changed at all? So an example of this being maybe a woman believes that people will only like her if she's perfect. Her perfectionist tendencies create a lot of stress and anxiety for her, so she agrees with a therapist to conduct a behavioural experiment that involves making a few mistakes on purpose and monitoring it. What she found was that most people didn't even notice the mistakes that she was making, and the ones that did helped to correct them. So when she went back and explored the results of that, she rated how strongly she believed, that people are only going to like her if she's perfect. And that changed because the belief wasn't actually valid. There was no evidence to support that. So it's important to reflect, okay, on what actually happens and re-rate how you feel about that after. That's an important part of the experiment. So I'd just like to summarise the key points from the presentation. Really check your expectations. Are they realistic? Start to recognise unhelpful thinking and what impact this has on you, because it's going to allow you to make change with that. Have a look at some of the tools and techniques that I've briefly mentioned. Try setting a SMART goal or set yourself an experiment to test that belief. And most important of all, no one is perfect. Not me, not anyone. And that's okay. Please remember that. So, as you can see, I've left some links here to some of the resources that I mentioned in the presentation. You can access all of other information as well on the self-help pages in the Counselling and Mental Health Service website. And if you feel you need further support at any time, please email the service on cmh.service@durham.ac.uk and request a self-referral form. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on perfectionism, and I hope it helps.